Welcome everyone to another Dolphin Communication Project webinar. Tonight's deep dive is on dolphin dining, feeding tactics, including mud ring feeding of bottlenose dolphins. And we are joined by Angel Ramos, who I didn't even realize until a few minutes ago that I know. I have met Eric at DCP's Bimini field site. We were chatting about mutual friends that we have, and lo and behold, he's actually been to Bimini and seen the dolphins that DCP studies there. He's currently at Rockefeller University, and we are honored to have him share his work with us. To those of you listening live, I will just remind you that we're recording, so if you don't want to be visible, please make sure your videos are off, and you will find yourselves muted. That's on purpose. So please use the chat function to submit your questions, and we'll do questions along the way, and we'll also do questions at the end. So with that, I will pass it over to Eric.
Okay, hi everybody. Just introduce myself before I share my screen. Angel Ramos. I'm a doctoral candidate in animal behavior and conservation. I defend my dissertation in 2 weeks, and I'm going to be doing my postdoc here at the Rockefeller University, where I currently work with octopuses. Most of my work is with marine mammals and the study of marine mammal ecology, and I'm working towards their conservation. And yeah, actually, Bimini was the first place I went, and I remember the first time I saw a wild dolphin, I remember like reading all the things about them and like what they do and like the jaw claps and slaps and all these stuff, and I get in the water and this dolphin just swims up like maybe like a meter in front of me and just starts going like jaw clapping at me, and I'm like, like, and it reminded me of this time when I'm from New York City and I was walking and like a pigeon literally in the middle of the street just started attacking my foot. So I don't know if I have that effect on animals, but it had an effect on me. And I went and worked started working in Belize, actually, working at Turnef Atoll with the bottlenose dolphin population out there. That actually the head of the Dolphin Communication Project that Kathleen Dzinski used to work at. And I found her old documents in like the old building that we had there, where I studied bottlenose dolphins, a population that lives in the offshore Belize. And since then, like since 2011, I've been working with lots of stuff, different species of dolphins, different species of marine mammals. A lot of my work now is based in the use of drones and bioacoustics to better understand animal ecology and study their lives. And so tonight I want to talk a little bit about like the ways that dolphins feed, and there's lots of ways and lots of species and lots of ways those species do it. So I'm just kind of give you a couple examples tonight from the stuff that I've done, and know that there's like a lot more out there to learn about all the other stuff that I don't get a chance to talk about. So let me just share my screen. Am I good now?
Yes, awesome. And Eric, I'm going to, just for bandwidth, turn off my video for the moment, and then I will pop my face back in when we have a question.
Sure thing. Okay, so preface, this talk was prepared for a presentation in Belize, so it has a little bit of a Caribbean context to it. We eat lots of ways. We eat lots of things. Feeding is fundamental to our lives, and if we don't feel it the same way the animals do, maybe because we can walk to a refrigerator and prepare something in like 20 seconds and microwave it and devour the amount that an animal would have to work really hard to get. But there's lots of ways that we're interested in our food, and lots of things that we like to eat, a diversity of stuff that doesn't lend itself much to practicality. We like different kinds of things that aren't necessarily what we need, but we have tastes and preferences we develop over our lifetimes. We have strategies for eating. I think a lot of us may purchase things at stores. Some of us may grow things and harvest our own food. Some of us may hunt and, prepare those foods in different ways, depending on the cultures. I'm getting very hungry looking at the screen, so I'm going to shift it. But these are some typical Belizean meals where some of the dolphins that I study live in, and they might really only eat from this, actually a good bit, the shrimp and the octopus probably from the ceviche, and the fish, they'd eat that. Chicken, unlikely. Eggs, definitely not, unless you were trying. But animals species are quite varied in what they do to survive, where they adapt, and what the outcomes are for their, not only how they look, but what they're eating. And a lot of the times, if you look at what an animal is eating and where that stuff lives, it will dictate a lot about, what is what's driving them. And so in this image here, I have some not deep sea fish, but some marine fishes that inhabit the same environments these dolphins do. These are often found around coral reefs, and based on their diets, they're restricted to specific areas. And in terrestrial environments, you might find something as, different as terrestrial reptiles that inhabit a tree and are capturing insects and small invertebrates that are out of reach to other things, but develop specific adaptations for eating the stuff that gives you the most energy with the least amount of hassle. Now, there's lots of ways to hunt food. There's going out and catching it, like you would with fishing hook or a spear gun, or traps to capture lobsters and finfish and other things. You could go out and use a gun to hunt animals. Now, a lot of us aren't thinking about that. And so part of a dolphin's life, to get into a dolphin's, I guess, flukes, you need to think a little bit about like what it is that's driving them. They need to feed. It's a priority. And they need to do it regularly, and they need to eat a fair bit. And in that, they need to find ways to regularly sustain that. Now, to do that, they don't really have the same kinds of tools that we do, but they do have big, convoluted brains that are capable of coming up with ways to deal with things. A lot of marine mammals have complicated ways of handling prey, and oftentimes it's because things don't want to get eaten and they're hard to catch. And so to sustain the energy that a killer whale might need, some of them in like Antarctica will hunt seals by driving waves up onto ice and pushing the seals right off. And I remember reading in a paper that if it's the one kind of seal, they won't even eat it, but they really liked a specific kind of seal. And so every time they knock them off, they would eat them. They might also slide up to beaches. I mean, sea otters using, like rocks and to break oysters, and to break clams on their bellies, and to evidence of tool use, like a complicated mechanism that these animals develop. And it's largely driven by their need to satisfy energetic requirements in environments that are complicated with things that don't want to be eaten. And like humpback whales using bubble net feeding are another good example of a totally different strategy. They're hunting smaller things, and so making a ring of bubbles is something that if you've ever gone fishing, is a pretty good strategy to actually encircle and catch things. Now, most of my work has been on bottlenose dolphins, coastal bottlenose dolphins that live just about everywhere in the world, but except for like the colder areas in the Arctic and Antarctic, but they live in the coasts, deep water, just about everywhere you go along any coast and deep sea, south of north 45-degree latitude and north of 45 south. But generally, in temperate to tropical climates, and they are here actually in New York. I look outside every day to the river to see if I see them, but I don't think they come this far up the East River. Now, the dolphins that I study in Belize, my interest in foraging a lot came from the fact that when I was first studying dolphins, I found dolphins using an interesting sound while they were feeding. Um, Honestly, I wasn't looking for it. It was like I was trying to study their whistles and recording their sounds, and I was hearing like stuff they do for communication, but it was really hard to study. And what I found very quickly was that these dolphins were making sounds while they were feeding. This is a video we got a couple of years ago of the dolphins feeding. There's a small population of bottlenose dolphins. There's a lot of residents, animals that live there, animals that have lived there for 30, 40 years, probably more. We don't know how to age them easily without using a tooth or other methods, but we can watch them over time and know how old they are. Now, this dolphin here is about to feed, about to search for food. And if you can't hear, she's doing this. And we we hypothesize it's to startle prey out of the seagrasses, because we see them feeding there a lot and so regularly that it seems to be a regular feeding habitat, a very stable behavior, and stuff that they do all the time. And this is a spectrogram of it, a visual representation of the sound. And you can see there's just a lot of energy in low frequencies. So in low pitch sounds, like they're putting energy there. And what's interesting is that fish have energy sensitivity in their hearing to that range. Now, we can't say for sure, but dolphins are really clever. And so the fact that they're feeding there regularly, moving their faces up and down, making these sounds, and we see fish startle and stuff, it's just we need some more studies to do something more experimental to have better evidence for it. But we think it might be that they're trying to scare the fish. In a lot of places, they do stuff like this. In a lot of places, they have different strategies for catching different things. In Shark Bay, Australia, you might have heard of the dolphins that pick up sponges and use them to feed in the in the bottom of the substrate, probably to protect their rostrums as they're digging out benthic prey. But it's a handful of animals that do it in a couple populations in one part of the world. And dolphins are, it's not uncommon for bottlenose dolphins to be this way. Now, these dolphins, these same dolphins in Belize, for my dissertation, I used drones to study their behavior and ecology. And in one of my studies, I was looking at how their movements were associated with their fine scale habitat selection. And in this video, which is sped up 8 times speed, you can see in that little inset the track of the drone that I'm flying over the dolphins, a track that we built to see the dolphin movement, and that the dolphins basically travel all across this area to concentrate their feeding in one spot. And in this spot, they're making a lot of sound. These animals are clever, have figured out a strategy, and it seems to be something that a handful of animals in the population do, but not all of them. And it's really mainly in that one spot. Now, just briefly, I want to touch on there are other species that do interesting things. And this is just one of our observations that we had from last year, which was off the Pacific coast of Mexico, a species called rough-toothed dolphins, Stenobretonensis. And what we saw them doing, which you'll see right here, is sharing food. Now, this isn't the tactic they used to catch it. We didn't see them catch it. But what's really interesting about this is that it's a sign that these animals are socially complex and share some kind of understanding of probably some level of reciprocity in terms of if we're living and working together and affiliated and investing time and energy in each other, we share food. And in that video here, you can see some of the dolphins are, 1 or 2 of the dolphins, just these 2, pick up the fish, drop it, pick it up again, and we'll pass it back and forth continuously over the course of this video. And there the dolphin goes to pick it up again. So not just clever in ways to feed, but complex in the ways that they do it and the way that affects their social lives. And we named all these dolphins here, Fuji, Moby, Pickles, and Blue. And each of those dolphins were, moving in different ways. Only 2 were interested in prey. And what's interesting was that they were also, a couple of them were having sex while they were feeding. So it was a little complicated. We couldn't tell what was what, but we knew for sure that they were sharing food back and forth. So mainly what I want to talk about tonight is the mud ring feeding that we recently identified in a population in a Caribbean estuary in Belize. And our paper, cleverly titled by my co-author, Natalie Casablanco Martinez, is Lords of the Rings, Mud Ring Feeding by Bottlenose Dolphins in a Caribbean Estuary, revealed from seas, air, and space. And if you would like a copy, please feel free to email me. My email will be on the top and the bottom of the slides, the beginning of the slide and the end. So feel free to email me and I will send you a copy. So again, dolphins have complicated ways of feeding. Sometimes it's small subsets of populations that get specialized to feed in ways that are highly adaptive to very specific ecological contexts. So strand feeding in the southern US and in some places in South America is where dolphins will strand up on the beach, swim up onto the beach, drive fish out. Now, is this the cleverest option? Definitely not. You could potentially put yourself at risk by placing yourself in a place where you could get stuck out of the water and die potentially. But is it the most lucrative way for them to get food? Likely, because if it's worth that much of a risk, then actually doing it regularly and getting the food, may give them the incentive to do it. It might just be something that they learned when they were young as calves, just like these sponge feeding dolphins that learn how to feed and from their mothers and then adapt and learn and over time develop the strategy. Most dolphin feeding strategies are learned from their mothers, and then they can be learned from associates as well. But in those early years, they're learning things from their mothers and their closest associates. So if that's what you do, it's what you do. And it's how you develop a strategy for specializing on a certain kind of prey, because it's what the animals around you do. And it might be what is most lucrative. But what's wild is that dolphins in the same populations can have different kinds of specializations and eat different kinds of things. So it's not just a one-all, like there's lobster, so we're all going to dine on lobster. It seems like they have variation, depending on some factors that probably have a lot to do with just individual experience and maybe just their taste preferences. I'm not sure. Now, dolphins in Florida had been identified mud ring feeding, and this is a behavior that's been documented before, well documented, where dolphins create a ring of mud while feeding. Basically what they do is they swim up, create a ring of mud, and then a bunch of dolphins around will wait to snag up the fish as they're leaping out of the water. It's been well documented in Florida and been a bunch of different documentaries and published in a couple papers.
Quick question. When you
Yeah.
say they make the mud ring, are they doing that primarily like with their flukes, with their entire bodies? What is their technique?
Great point. So they will swim in a circle, kick their flukes against the bottom, banging their tail against the bottom. And if you've ever swam in a shallow lake or something and been the one to kick up the mud, or in the reef and kick up the sand, you know that it's hard for the sediment that's suspended in the water to settle. It takes a little while. So they kick up mud and it creates a circular ring because they're swimming in a circle and kicking up the bottom. Now, we think that it's mainly the mud ring itself that is helping enclose the prey, because they're not just swimming. They could swim in a circle around the fish, but it's not that what they're doing. They're hitting the bottom and intentionally creating a wall of mud. Now in Florida, they're doing this pretty quickly. It's like 10 to 30 seconds or something, and they're rapidly swimming in the circle, and then a bunch of dolphins are diving to the surface or jumping to the surface as the fish are leaping. Now, it's also really concentrated in very shallow areas around very, very bound to mud banks and right against shallow little land masses on the coast. What they found in a previous study, the first study that documented by Torres and Reed, was that these dolphins that were diving deep while feeding versus dolphins that were making these circles seemed to have different areas where they fed based on different habitats, where they were found in completely different regions based on different kinds of characteristics that were in those habitats, which are probably driven by what prey they eat, given that the mud ring feeding dolphins were basically only eating mullet, as you can see the fish jumping from the surface. Now, there's other strategies like mud plume feeding, which is interesting. Not too far away in Florida, there's the animals there swim in a semicircle, and then maybe use just that half a wall to create a wall of mud and catch the prey. But again, it might be because a certain kind of fish or environment, or it just might be what the dolphin learned in its life and has or adapted in another way. But it is something that's stable, that's been seen regularly in this population, similar to the muttering feeding, and not too far away from that. Now, the goals of one of our others, the study was like to report on these behaviors and to characterize them, try to compare them with what was known before. I'll tell you that this study was totally opportunistic in nature, in that we'd seen pictures of mudring feeding, of circles in the seagrass, in the sand, from aerial surveys in Belize years ago from one of my colleagues and co-authors here. I looked at it and thought, looks like it could be dolphins, but we didn't see the dolphins yet. And over years, we built a couple pieces of evidence. And then finally, my colleague in 2000, I think it was in 2019, saw it with a drone. I had gone there, helped train them to fly drones and use them for monitoring. He flew it over dolphins and saw the spectacular mudring feeding, which kind of spawned this whole study. So sometimes science comes because you keep paying attention and you focus and you're able to get the right amount of information, but we want more in the future. So we pieced this together from aerial survey data and analyzing a single flight of 2 flights from drone videos and a couple boat-based observations where we saw it. And then the other thing was that we figured maybe you could see it in a satellite. I mean, it's big enough. And I was actually just on the phone with my friend talking to him and being like, and he recommended it. My friend Steve was like, well, why don't you like look in Google Earth? I see stuff like that. And I'd never really thought about it. I know some people had done studies like that, and went home and clicked on Google Earth and went right into the spots that I would have expected to see mudring feeding in Florida, and then where we'd seen the mudring feeding in Chetumal Bay and Belize. First, I want to show you what we saw that was confirmation of this behavior. So in this video, you can see one animal, in all likelihood, the mother, I mean, it's difficult to say 100% because we hadn't seen her multiple times with this calf, but the fact that she was swimming with this calf for many hours alone, and it was fairly big, indicates it's likely the mother. She swims in a circle, kicks her flukes on the bottom, creates this wall of mud, and then the other animal, this smaller animal, presumably a calf based on its size, swims into the mud ring, and they both start feeding. Now, what was really interesting was that this is not what's seen in Florida. In Florida, it is quite a tight circle followed by snagging fish at the surface. This looks a lot more like a smokescreen and then going in with like night vision goggles to get the fish. Because if you can imagine that dolphins are making echolocation and trying to herd fish while they've now blacked them out from seeing around them, it's a scary circumstance. And it might be a little different because the habitat's different. It is a totally different area. Let me emphasize here that Florida Bay is up in the US. Corozal Bay is down in Mexico and Belize, so cross the Caribbean like sideways at a 45-degree angle and go a couple thousand kilometers and you're there. But unlikely the dolphins can travel from there in their, there could always be the one dolphin that got blown across the sea, but it's not that likely. What's interesting is these habitats are remarkably similar. 2-meter, 1-meter deep bays with mud substrate, shallow all throughout, and a lot of mullet and fish that live right up along the coast. So this is what it looked like from the surface, and you could see the plume, but it's very difficult to see the actual ring until you get above the animals and you can see the circular movements they're making. this photo was the one that we had seen before, and it showed us these spirals that I had seen on like the BBC, I'm like from Florida, and I was like, looks just like it, but we didn't have enough. But then we went through the videos and saw that they really do appear everywhere that they were feeding. There were bunches and bunches of circles, just like the ones in Florida. So to give you a sense of where this happened, you can use this cool Google Earth feature to make like a flying view. So this is Belize in Central America. And in this shallow bay, Chetumal Corozal Bay, you can find these mud rings. You can actually find them yourself in Google Earth. These circular rings along the shore. Each of these was created by a dolphin swimming in a circle. They're almost all within like a couple meters of shore, similar in size, like 7 to 10 meters across, but like pretty regularly that size. They only really happen in these remote little parts of the lagoon, all along the coast. And now we looked through Google Earth imagery and satellite imagery for many years, but images are actually expensive. You have to buy satellite imagery. Who knew? And so you can use free ones. And in free ones, we found a bunch. There's always more to buy. But for now, what we found in Google Earth from a few different years gave us confirmation that like these are happening. Now, I want to know more and I want to see more because in some areas it happened a lot, like concentrated in a bunch in all this one area where I'm sure is important for dolphin feeding. And my research group there, FINS, does monitoring of the area for dolphins, and we study the dolphin population. In this image here, you can see two little black specks. Those black specks look almost identical to the dolphins that we saw in the video. And we actually found more dolphins in satellite imagery. So from satellites from space, sitting actually on your phone and Google Maps, you could actually find these rings. Now, it was a little harder in Belize and Mexico. There weren't as many. And we did have to make sure it wasn't something else, because there are traps that look kind of like it, but they never build them that close to shore, and they leave very distinct remnants. Also, the ancient Mayans built these crazy, like long walls, fishing walls that are like a J trap, they call them, and it's a wall of rocks to catch fish. And this is totally speculative on my part, but if you look at these three things, mud rings, these traps that today fishermen use, and these J traps that the Mayans used thousands of years ago, I find that there's like this amazing convergence, and I really wonder if like who learned from whom? Did the dolphins learn from the people learn from dolphins, or are we just both smart in the same way that you can catch fish closer to the shore in this bay than anywhere else? Now, in Florida, there are more dolphins doing this, likely, and also there's a lot more satellite imagery, good satellite imagery, because in the US we have more funding for it, and also it's more freely accessible than in a lot of other places in the world. So there was more possibilities to find it, and I think just it's more common with more dolphins doing it. But to give you an example, we even saw a bunch of dolphins in the satellite imagery feeding and making these mud rings that are just so closely matched to what's seen in satellite imagery, it's hard to think that they could be anything else. We measured all these rings to see how similar they were. They were really similar in size. In Belize and Mexico, they seem to be a little bigger. And maybe that's because they're making a ring of like to catch fish in a net of a smoke screen rather than tightly trying to squeeze a school of fish, I don't know, pop them out of the water, basically. It might be because of that. Maybe it's not, that different at all. We still need more studies. We really only found like 100 mud rings in remnants of the mud rings, these trails in Belize and Mexico in satellite imagery, and another, dozen or so in the video. But these dolphin populations are not well studied, so we just hadn't seen them, and not a lot of people live along the shores of these bay. It's largely unpopulated, so it's something that would be difficult to see. So now we're going to put some dedicated studies together to do it and try to compare it to Florida, where the rings were a little smaller, but it makes sense with what we know so much more for there than we know for the Caribbean. But in Florida, they look remarkably similar. And there were
just slightly smaller in size, but right within the range, such that maybe it's not that different. But in Florida, we had thousands to measure. We found 1,800 in the imagery in Google Earth, whereas in our study, we really relied on just the trails we saw in satellites and in the aerial surveys, so there were very little. That's how far dolphins in these two different populations have come up with a strategy for creating a mud ring as a tool to hunt fish. And that's wild, because I don't think any dolphins are traveling back and forth, and these places are super similar. And to emphasize this, this bay has almost no seagrass. And the video I just showed you of the dolphins feeding at Turneffe Atoll in Belize, just in the offshore, depend almost entirely on seagrass. So even within the same country, within not too far apart, it's different strategies. So the fact that these two different populations came up with these strategies, maybe independently, is just kind of amazing to me, that there's something underlying that capacity to innovate that gave them the same idea. So it's a little different in each place, but not so much, and maybe we'll find that overlapping, it's really just slight variations depending on what's most practical, or maybe just what was the first dolphin that ever figured out this way to do it, and another dolphin figured out another way. So both bays are shallow, both have muddy bottoms, both don't have enormous abundances of prey relative to like reef-like areas or offshore areas that are, or upwellings in much more productive waters. I mean, there's not an enormous amount swimming about, and a lot of it you'll find hugging the coast or kind of benthic. And then also, if you are a dolphin and you all feed the same way, you might actually compete a little bit. Kind of like if we all went to the same restaurant or all fed in the same patch, it would get a little hectic and we'd be competing. So naturally, animals find ways to reduce competition by developing different niches for dietary niches, even within species. And so it might just be that dolphins are using a complement of like, this is what's best. And also, I'm just going to do this and not bother with that fish over there. There's too many dolphins over there doing that. I mean, huge anthropomorphization, but the fact that they develop different dietary strategies in the same populations, and you can see two dolphins do totally different things in the same day in the same kind of habitats, just depending on what they're feeding or who they are, is strong evidence for a lot of individual specialization and variation that may be just highly adaptive to, in the scope of their life. Now, we think that they're eating very similar stuff in Corozal and Chetumal Bay, so it would make even more sense if it was something that was just really effective for feeding on this species. And is it evidence of convergence that they figured it out and they both came up with the same idea? It might be evidence of culture, because this is a behavior that's specialized, that needs to be passed on and would likely need to be learned, and maybe not innovated independently every time, because dolphins in lots of other places don't do this. But we have seen there is a little evidence of dolphins do this in a couple places, like a couple different species that I've heard of recently since we published the paper. So maybe it's not something that's so uncommon. And humpback whales swim in big circles and make bubble nets. So maybe it's a, clever thing that clever animals do, is make a circle to herd your prey. A lot of animals do it, but the way that they do it may just be uniquely circular. Now, the management part is that these populations are not that big in Corozal and Chetumal Bay. I mean, we don't know how many dolphins are there, but it's not likely more than 150 to 200 at any given time. It's a lot of guesswork now, but based on the other populations, we think maybe in that range or smaller, but there might be more dolphins visiting. Either way, dolphins that develop foraging specializations like mud ring feeding tend to have restricted ranges, restricted prey types, and maybe more at threat of extinction or endangerment if those prey are harmed. And a salient example here is that the bay that these dolphins live in Mexico was a path was dredged from the sea that allowed water to come through for human passage at some point in the not so distant past, and that changed the ecosystems within this bay. So will the dolphins be able to persist mud ring feeding in the future if maybe mullet become less abundant and other prey, or will they even just say, forget it, I'll just, chase these big school of fish because now they're here? We don't know, but it's a possibility either way. And lastly, I just want to thank everyone who made this study possible, and our work on dolphin foraging possible, and my mom, who actually inspired me to do this and everything else. And with that, I'll end. And yeah, feel free to ask any questions, and thank you for your attention on this evening.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Eric. We do have a few questions. Before we get to them, I will just remind folks that this will be posted if you're listening live. If you're listening to the recording and you're wondering where more DCP programs are, you can head to our website and look under that education tab and you'll find webinars. We also have them posted to our YouTube channel, cleverly titled Dolphin Communication Project. This was a deep dive, so a little more advanced. We also have dolphin lessons, which are geared toward a younger audience and young at heart. And if you've gotten through all of our webinars and you still need more, make sure you check out our podcast, The Dolphin Pod. It's wherever you get your podcasts. And then we are happy, of course, to be able to offer these programs for free. We value getting accurate scientific information out to the world, and we have obviously are in debt to our speakers. And if you want to support these efforts, you can do so by our Adopt a Dolphin program. You can become a member, you can get t-shirts, you can join us in the field, especially now if you're feeling safer traveling. And then we can be your Amazon Smile nonprofit. Though I also have to say, even if you don't choose DCP, if you shop with Amazon, you should always use Amazon Smile. Help them help others. And then we have Wanderer bracelets and Stream to See products that we benefit from. And then, of course, how to stay in touch. Our website and our email and all of our social media are there as well. We have several questions, trying to see what order to put them in. And now I'm going to stop my share because I can't find the list I was copying them into. We'll go out of order. We'll go with the most recent question first. The rough-toothed dolphins that were food sharing, while they were also having sex, is it male-male, female-male, or female-female pairs?
So funny story, definitely a couple of those were males because we did see their penises, and we did see what looked like intromission, the act of sex, but it's difficult to know because we didn't actually see any female present her bottom, and these dolphins do have sex between male, male, female, female, and a male can have sex with the males slit. So we didn't know who exactly was female. If everyone was female, there were definitely a couple males.
Mm-hmm.
But it was, at least in essence, the full acts of sex, but male and male, female, female, definitely male on everything.
Those dolphins. So we see a lot of that in Bimini as well.
Oh wait, I missed this. I missed the funniest part about that. I forgot, which is that every time they were having sex, the male dolphin would open his mouth and do this ridiculous cackling thing that was like, and it like, and I don't have enough data to do a study on it yet, but it's going to have an absurd title because it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. But it was like in 10 different instances where I was like, oh, look, they're having sex. I look at the male and he's just literally like, his mouth is open, like just, but not clapping it shut, just like, kind of just like, and it's very silly looking. And one of those figures, you can see it. I just wasn't able to expand upon it like I wanted to.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I have to interrupt then and ask, in relation to that and what you were just saying, and when you were talking about the acoustics that you were recording, when you had drone footage, and drones don't usually have audio. So
Oh no, yeah, here I wasn't
Okay.
recording acoustics because these dolphins were on the move. And so for the video, we followed them for like 10 minutes, but they took us like, you know, 3 or 4 kilometers because what was crazy is that they never stopped moving. So we were just persistently watching them and they just continued swimming. Whereas in Belize, where we are able to fly the drone and then record from our small boat in the shallows, because the dolphins stay put and because we're able to put the recorder in the water and be with them, the rough tooths are a lot harder to record. They move so quickly.
Yeah.
They like, you have to like pick up your hide your phone, put your engine back on and keep going because they don't like stop. Even when they're feeding in that video, they don't stop to feed. Like they just continue swimming. So it was a different scenario both those places.
Cool. And that actually, you kind of covered one of our other questions, which was about having the boat simultaneously recording the vocalizations with the hydrophone while the drone was filming as well.
Yeah.
So if we're visualizing correctly, there's a boat with a hydrophone in the water. The drone is filming. Is there also an underwater video camera? Were you able to get an underwater perspective of the feeding?
So, great question. I feel like every dolphin feeding strategy requires a different complement of methods. The mud ring feeding, they are creating a wall of mud. So you can't see anything underwater because even if they've just made one of them, and they make a lot of them when they start feeding, the water's all murked up already. And so you can't even see it. Second, the water is only like 1.5 meters deep. So getting that close to dolphins in that shallow, I've never, I wouldn't even think of it in that water because I never really would have gone to that shallow water in the first place to find them, or my boat might not even make it into the, into those shallows. Yeah.
Someone asked, what height were you flying the drone at?
So I typically fly the drone at like 30 to 45 meters or so, maybe a little higher. The reason why is that like we did some studies to see if our dolphin population responded to drones. They really didn't much. It was like a very small proportion, like a minute or two out of like 55 hours of like video where like they kind of looked up and went like, and then kept going. So, and whereas manatees are like way skittish and like I'm so cautious with them because they in Belize at least they get super startled. So with dolphins we settled on like a 30 to 45 meter altitude, basically a compromise between trying to see the whole group, which in our area they don't spread out that far like them in the deep sea, so they might be spread out like over 50 100 meters max, but they're almost always clustered in a small area. And so we're able to fly like 30-40 meters, follow the group. Now if they stop moving, I can drop the hydrophone, turn off the engine, but if they don't, I can't use the acoustics. So I often have the circumstance where they're just moving, and at least I can keep following them and tracking what they're doing. But recording them is a nightmare if they're moving because you have to kind of pick up and move. And so if people don't know, a hydrophone is very sensitive, and you can't have an engine on easily because it drowns out the sounds. It makes a lot of noise, and also if you move it around, it makes a lot of noise. You kind of have to be still or have it encased in things to make it still and protected. So having your engine on and following around animals is not ideal. So our acoustic work was largely successful with the foraging dolphins in Belize because they stay put and they stay in one spot. And I don't know what the mud ring feeding dolphins would sound like yet because we got to get some hydrophones like in the water as they're feeding. But I'm betting that in what we saw, they would do a lot of like feeding in, making sounds to hunt out the fish, and the drone kind of supports that because you see like rapid chasing and then tail spinning and stuff. And at 30 or 45 meters, I can see everything that that dolphin and all the other dolphins are doing in the area.
You've segued nicely to two more questions. The footage you showed, and I'm adjusting this one a little bit, but the footage you showed that had the presumed mother-calf pair, is that common to have just a pair of dolphins, or was it more common to have a larger group when they did the mud ring feeding?
So in the couple other observations we had from boat-based surveys and an aerial survey, we did see a couple groups doing the feeding behavior, but it is, we don't know how common it is. Just beyond, we have no idea how common it is in our populations in Central America, what the group sizes or what. It could be, a couple dolphins or more, no idea. But based on the fact that most of our groups in that area are like an average of like 3 or 4 animals, I'm guessing it's never a lot more. And in most places where dolphins do these kinds of specializations, like coastal bottlenose dolphins, it's not often like a huge group of them because it'll get like unwieldy and I don't think it's functional. So they'll be in like a few of them. So I'm betting it's a handful of animals at a time that would ever really do it in one area. And that's kind of typical for the Caribbean, at least we're in the Western Caribbean. Like I see dolphins like in small groups traveling together and kind of spread out doing different stuff in different areas.
And to the dolphins, I guess, with the drone footage from the altitude you were recording at, were you ever able to ID individual dolphins?
So that's a great question. I wish I were able to, but unfortunately, bottlenose dolphins don't have distinct enough coloration that at those altitudes, coloration or scarring or anything, that at those altitudes, they're easily distinguishable. Now, it doesn't mean you can't distinguish them. Like you might be able to see them fine when they pop up at the surface and be like, oh, that's the one with the scars and that one's here. But then when they go underwater and they swim around, they turn a different angle, it's complicated. Whereas in the food sharing paper we did, those rough-toothed dolphins fortuitously have patches all over them. And I was like, I could see which one was which, and I was able to track them over time. Whereas in our dolphin foraging videos, even when I'm with a group of like 4 dolphins, I don't, like once they go underwater, even with the drone, it's so difficult to know who's who unless they're like, differently sized or one of them has a big scar. It's difficult. They just don't have a lot of features that are easily distinguished where you could both fly over a sufficient altitude to see everything they're doing and pick out little things. So with bottlenose dolphins, really hard. With other species, I'd say not so bad. Like I've ID'd humpback whales, manatees, and other things, and it's a little bit easier if they just got surface and scarring. Bottlenose dolphins are just so like uniformly gray, and their scarring just doesn't stand out enough from
especially from that angle, from looking down at them instead of perpendicular.
And I think in the future, for sure, in 10 years, I'm sure it'll be possible because the camera systems in 10 years will be able to get the detail at, 30, 40 meters that, right now we need it to be like right on top of them. Like I'm confident in that, but like it takes technology to catch up. So it's useful in some populations and other things and for some context, but just think if you're tracking them over time and you're trying to follow them, it's like trying to follow a group of people in a crowd from above. Like hard to see where people go and figure out how to track each individual one. And if they're all wearing the same outfit, it's, really difficult.
Where's Waldo?
Yeah, it's a little bit like that.
So we have one more question. Folks are welcome to pop another question if they want. This one's going to be fairly transparent that I'm interested in it as well. The beginning of your talk when you showed the bottlenose feeding in the seagrass, is that dolphin feeding in fish that are hiding in the seagrass, or is it also feeding in fish that are buried in the sand? Which anyone who follows DCP knows that the bottlenose and bimini do crater feeding where they're digging prey items out of the sand. And so we were curious what was happening there.
So great observation there. So unlike the crater feeding and the habitat they do it in Belize, a lot of the substrate that they're feeding, and mainly in the seagrass beds dominating the lagoons, the shallow lagoons that are like 3 to 5 meters deep. These seagrass beds have like a, are formed by a structure where rhizomes, dense kind of like netting like structure that, is not easy for them to get in there. And the consequences, I think, that a lot of these dolphins have their faces all scratched up, like all their rostrums are scratched and stuff because they're digging in the like within the seagrass. So if this is the seagrass fluttering along, from everything I've seen, they mainly just kind of bat it aside and will try to dry fish out. But they sometimes just do this. Like if this is the seagrass, they'll just move over it. So I think it's a mix of like, if they come out, if the fish will come out or they find them first or they dart away, great. But if not, you got to dig around a little bit. But I think the digging around is less preferred because there's a lot of corals and rocks and seashells. And if you're a dolphin and moving your mouth quickly in the seagrass, you could easily, they have tons of cuts around their mouth, and I bet that's not pleasant. So, but I'm pretty sure it's not digging anything out because we don't see them make any plumes or anything. But it could be things that are inhabiting the benthos, just not like, I don't think, underneath. Whereas there are other dolphins in the population that I have seen feeding in sandy bottoms, not doing anything like crater feeding, but digging out things from sand. And I've only seen it a couple of times, but a mother calf that I saw used to do it regularly. They would go into like the sandy boundary where like the other dolphins didn't feed, and they would be just like mucking up the sand and digging things out. There's a handful of other dolphins in our population that do the same thing. And I don't know what they're feeding on, but it's muck, silt, and sand. So they're digging stuff out. But I don't think they go deep. I think a lot of it's just surface because there's not a lot that's like deep sandy that you can dig into. When I saw the dolphins do that in Bimini, I was like, wow, that's amazing. Because if you do that in Turnef, you would like cut yourself up with all the rocks and coral. It's just not the same kind of habitat.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for this awesome talk. Thank you to everyone who listened live and contributed questions. Stay in touch, and everyone who is listening to the recording, we hope that you've enjoyed it and that we see you at another DCP program.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.